What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to What's on My Deck. We got a brand new boat, a brand new Phoenix 21 PHX we're in right now. So we are going to, this is the first What's on My Deck. Literally, I just got this boat rigged up, got it out of the water for the first time. It runs, that's a bonus. I'm ready to pick back up into the season with a new boat. And of course, you know, I had to rig up some new fresh rods to put in the new boat, and I'm pretty excited. It's kind of a new era coming up for G Loomis with the introduction of the NRX Plus, you know, a flagship rod that I've now had a lot of time under my belt with, and I've gotten a lot of my stuff switched over to that platform or other G Loomis platforms. I'm really excited to dive right into that. It's late February, early March, so this is how we're going to do this from now. Instead of monthly, you know, February, Minnesota, not really nothing going on right now, frozen solid. February and, you know, late February, March in Florida, things are starting to wrap up already. You know, the winter time's over, pre-spawn's getting to be about over, spawn's getting to be about over. Things are pushing into post-spawn and into summer things already. So basically, where are we? We've been in Florida, North Florida. We're here on Chattanooga in Tennessee at Chickamauga, the Gunnersville area, and Santee Cooper, South Carolina. So kind of southeastern, pretty deep south type stuff, but still at the same time we're starting to get more into some reservoir stuff, getting around the gizzard shad, and it's mega pre-spawn. The end of winter, getting into early pre-spawn, and then as the month of March kind of rolls around, we're going to start approaching the spawn. So kind of got a good array of baits. I literally rigged up a whole compartment full, but I pulled out 10 and we're going to dive right in on them. First and foremost, I am rocking a jig. This is an Outkast tackle cage fighter jig. You got a cage fighter from Outkast tackle, you got a stealth fighter. The stealth fighter I use when I'm not in a cage, as the cage fighter is called. The stealth fighter is a lot of times for, you know, wood docks, definitely milfoil, flipping grass. But if I'm around stuff like lily pad stems or laydowns, brush piles, I'm gonna go with the cage fighter, fighting out of a cage. So the Outkast tackle cage fighter is a 1/2 ounce model right here. I'm using a BioSpawn Exo Pod on the bottom of it. Really nice this time of year. It doesn't have a ton of action like you would get out of, say, a Rage Craw or even a Menace, something like that, which I would be more apt to use later into the season. You know, once the bluegills are up around the beds, they're getting up shallow, stuff like that. But right now, water temp's only 52, 53. I want a nice subtle deal. At the same time, it has a little bit of action to it when I'm reeling it fast, especially with this 1/2 ounce. So it gives me a little something as I'm reeling around. I can pitch it underneath laydowns, treat it like a jig, reel it out. My rod, I'm using a brand new G Loomis NRX Plus 894C jig worm rod. That's a 7.5 fast action, medium action rod. About perfect, probably the premier rod in the NRX Plus lineup, most sought after rod, 7.5 heavy action NRX Plus, and I paired that with the Shimano Metanium XG 8-speed. Why? Because for this I'm using the rod to impart the action. I'm pitching into areas, pitching this thing into laydowns, underneath boat docks, and then I'm using the rod to impart the action. So I get the bite, I want to set the hook, and I want to reel them in quick. And then I'm using straight 17-pound fluorocarbon, Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon. This is kind of an awesome rod just to have around this time of year through the rest of the season when I'm up shallow. You can never go wrong. Straight fluorocarbon. Might bump this fluorocarbon up to 20 pound, but for right now we got it on 17 because I might kind of play around with jig sizes and things like that. I do like the jig pre-spawn. I think the bigger fish just get on it, it gets bites. After the spawn, a lot of times I'll start messing with the Texas rig a little bit more, but still, let's actually talk about the Texas rig. I got a new setup here for me. I've actually fished this rod quite a bit. This is the exact same rod we were just using, but the GLX model. G Loomis 894C jig worm rod, same exact model of this NRX Plus, but this is the GLX. No particular reason why I'm using it over one or the other. They're both excellent rods and a great price point. GLX is what I started using when I really got serious about bass fishing. The G Loomis GLX line was the one that I used. I'm using, again, that model, 7.5 heavy, almost the same setup, straight 17-pound fluorocarbon. And my reel here is I'm using a brand new one. This is one that I'm kind of excited to show off. This is the new Shimano Bantam. Again, I'm using the XG, so I'm throwing a ribbon tail worm. Again, I'm using the rod to impart the action, so I want to, after the hook set, pick up on them real quick. But this Bantam, awesome new reel. I haven't got a ton of time to use it. I love the way it feels. I was a fan of the older Bantam. At the same time, this one just feels a little bit different to me. I like the body on this one a little bit better, and at the same time, the spool size and how they got this thing put in here. And of course, course, the MGL spool, always super important, and infinity drive. We're just talking about a strong reel that can cast a long ways and pick up line great, but at the same time, it's got an awesome spool for casting and plenty of gearing in here to get those fish and get them out a solid core body. At the same time here, I'm rocking a couple new things. One, the BioSpawn ribbon tail. That's nothing new. I've been using that quite a bit. This might be a Cinco. This might be an Exo stick, the ribbon tail. I'd be switching this up. This is right now, you know, shallow brush piles. They're coming onto flats. They're thinking about moving up. I find a couple isolated brush piles. Isolated lily pads are still down in the south. You know, even in Minnesota this time of year, they'll start to get on the pad stems. This is going to be a rod I'm going to throw in there at them. But I'm using a new heavy cover owner cover shot hook. And if I slide this up, it's got the same fluorocarbon keeper. It's got the technology behind this super duper sharp Zowire coated hook. And I just love how this bait fits into stick bait style worms, Cincos, and also stuff like brush hogs, stuff like that. Things that are a little bit longer, a little bit slimmer. I think it just fits the profile. Plenty of backbone, good for casting and setting the hook and getting them out of there. But other than that, it's a, you know, and I'm using a little 3/16 or a 1/4 ounce Woo Tungsten Weight, never chip. I don't have to think about my color size weight. I'm not trying to fool anybody there. I'm just using one that doesn't chip so I can get the most out of my tungsten. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory on its own, because other tungsten chips so fast that you end up changing it out all the time anyway. So again, I'll have more on this Bantam soon. Just got my hands on it. Literally just got line on it. First initial casts were awesome. Excited to get it broke in, set a few hooks, and I'm sure you guys will be hearing back from me on what I think about this reel in the end. Next up, let's go with the spinnerbait. Here I'm using a rod that's going to come up quite a bit. I'm still caught between two rods when it comes to throwing the spinnerbait. I'm really liking the NRX Plus 843 MBR rod. That's a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. I'm liking that a lot. If I'm more open, like right here would be a great scenario for throwing the 843, as I can throw it at these little targets and stuff real accurate. At the same time, if I'm offshore on a hydrilla flat, something like that, a little bit more open, like what I was seeing in Florida, the 7.4 fast action medium heavy, which is actually the bladed jig rod, the Loomis NRX Plus 883C BJR, stands for bladed jig rod. Awesome chatterbait rod. You're going to see it come up next with my chatterbait, but I'm also using it for swim jig. You'll probably see it a couple times today. So I'll just keep this one at the spinnerbait. I think it's a great action, casts really far. But again, if I start getting into tighter coverage, we need to make tighter, more accurate casts, like we're approaching this time of year on these types of reservoirs like I got behind me, I'm probably going to switch to that 843, and I'm pretty impressed with it. Matter of fact, I've caught some really big fish on it already this year. That I'm surprised I put it on this one, but again, I was on more open water. I can make a little bit longer cast. My spinnerbait, a 1/2 ounce Bassman Carl's Compact. I'm using just a little power worm here on the back. Kind of a nice little deal. I do like using trailers. Not huge on using trailer hooks. I think that helps them zero in and get a bigger bite on it. Okay, one thing I want to point out is this color that I chose. There's a reason for this. A little bit white and shaddy on top, a little bit bluegilly and green on the top, maybe even still holds a gizzard shad look all the way around. But that's the time of year that I'm talking about right now, where you got fish that are pulling in. You know, they've been eating a lot of shad, gorging a lot of shad. Now they're getting up shallow. They're eating crawdads. Definitely the bluegills are going to be following along behind them, but you still have some shad getting up shallow too, and the gizzard shad, stuff like that, thinking about spawning. So it's just kind of a little perfect all scenario spinnerbait for me to throw this time of year. If I start to notice that there's a lot of bluegills in the area, I might go to more of a green one. As if I start seeing a lot of shad or I get a shad spawn, I'm going to switch that out to like a white one. My reel is a Shimano Metanium HG. Now I'm using the reel to impart the action, so I stepped it down to a 7-speed. I think that's pretty good for something like this. I can burn the spinnerbait back in. At the same time, I can kind of slow roll it like you have to do pre-spawn. And I'm using, again, straight 17-pound Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon line. Pretty boring on my line choices here, I know, but if it's not broke, don't fix it. And 17 just seems to be a lot of the best thing, you know, best all way around. But again, this bladed jig rod paired up with this Metanium, a Bassman Carl Compact, deadly pre-spawn combination. Do not sleep on a spinnerbait. Next up, gotta stay with the structure out there, and I'm throwing a biffle head right here. This could be a football jig, maybe Carolina rig, out here on the Tennessee River, maybe a big Meg shaky, but at this point in time right now, you get on little shallow hard spots as you're approaching in, little creek channel turns, stuff like that. I can power fish this bait, I can drag it slow, I can do everything I can do with a football jig, and I can switch in between either a craw presentation, or in this case, I'm throwing the BioSpawn Exo Swimmer, and this is the big dog. Their bigger version, sexy shad color. Again, I can throw this, I can reel it back. Basically, it is a jig head, like I'd be throwing, but it's more versatile than that. I can roll it through old foundations, stuff like that, following creek channels, following road beds. Just a very good bait to use this time of year to move water and clean stuff up, and at the same time be able to fish it slow. Anytime I'm dragging something offshore, I'm definitely using this rod. This is the NRX Plus 873C Carolina rig rod, CRR. It's 7.3 fast, medium heavy action rod. Great for the Carolina rig, really good for dragging offshore stuff. Football jigs, biffle heads, Meg shaky, any of that kind of stuff that I want to drag something on the bottom offshore on 17 or 15 or 20 pound fluorocarbon line. In this case, again, 17 pound Seaguar Invizx. I'm just using, this is like an Outkast tackle, or not, this isn't even Outkast, this is actually Strike King tungsten head that I'm using. You just put on your own hook, but this hook is one that I really like on the biffle head style. It's got a ton of gap in it, and this is the Owner Extra Wide Gap Jungle Hook. Again, what I like about this, it's tungsten, I feel better, but at the same time I can put the hook of my choice on there. A lot of these companies that are making hard heads put on a hook, and it's just not that good of a hook, so I just don't want to use it from the get-go. At the same time, the swim bait works, so it's got a ton of gap in there, so when they eat this thing, I'm getting them on it. A lot of times when you're throwing a biffle, you're just reeling along the bottom, you don't even feel a bite, you just can't feel the bottom no more, so it's important to be able to string them. And this medium heavy action rod that has a ton of backbone but a fast tip is still going to be perfect to kind of load those fish up, almost like a deep crankbait, but a solid hook behind them to really penetrate that and keep them on all the way to the boat. I'm using a Shimano Metanium right here. This is an HG. I'm using the reel to impart the action. At times I'm dragging, so a 7-speed gear ratio is about ideal. The chatterwagon, the chatterbug, chatterbait, bladed jig. I use it all the time, all year long. Definitely good in the pre-spawn. Calls up big bites. This is a 1/2 ounce jackhammer. I'm using their little bait on the back of it. I switch out. Sometimes I use a small Exo swimmer. Just depends on fluke. I'm just going with what I'm going with. This is what I had out in Florida. I actually caught a lot of fish on this. I like the green pumpkin color. Again, you can see me going with the green pumpkin, sun bluegilly meets crawdad meets shad color. I'm kind of stuck in that right now. Here in about a couple weeks, I might be switching to a lot more red and oranges. As those crawdads get going, those fish get a little bit more ornery, and now they kind of commit to the shallows. I'm using a Loomis NRX bladed jig rod. That's 883C BJR. That's a fast action, medium heavy 7.4. Great all around size rod. I hope NRX Loomis continues to pump out rods in that 7.3, 7.4 size range. It just works really well for me. I got it again with the Shimano Metanium HG reel, straight 17 pound Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon. I don't know how much I'm selling here. I'm selling a lot of Metaniums, a lot of Seaguar 17 pound tests, but again, it's the time of year. We are power fishing a lot. I have one spinning rod set up, and I had to force myself to put it on here, and you all know who follow me. If I had it my way, I'd rock 10 spinning rods up here for you, but it is power fishing time of year. Big fish moving up. They've been eating all winter. They're moving up shallow. They're, you know, the spawn's coming. They're looking to eat up. I want to force feed them, and I'm not playing a lot of games with them this time of year. Real clear water still, even for these Tennessee River areas. We're getting out of Florida, which is generally clean water, switching out from braid and going to a lot of fluorocarbon line. Speaking of power fishing, let's talk about this one. Busted this one out, got it out on my deck, starting to throw the bigger baits. And why am I looking with bigger baits? Because I catch big fish. There's just something about it. I've seen way too much in my life. Some personally, a lot of times watching somebody else in my boat or with them in their boat do something really special with a big glide bait. Now, these aren't the biggest glide baits in the world by any stretch of imagination. Matter of fact, the ones that I like to use mostly are going to get you tournament bites still. But they match the size, okay? We don't have big trout here where I'm fishing, but we do have gizzard shad, and that's about the perfect size of a gizzard shad. This is an Arashi glide, awesome all-around bait. Now, I do have some cool fancy ones I show off from time to time from some, you know, really, really seriously badass high-end swim bait manufacturers, and you will see those from time to time, but if I'm just to push one that I could use the rest of my life, as of right now, it would be this one for the price point, 2 for the action and how easy it is to move and swim this bait in the water, and the color patterns, and it's just a really good all-around get bit bait. So it's probably the one that I end up using the most. The setup for this, we're switching it up a little on you. 25-pound Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon line. I have an owner snap up top here that I'm using just to switch out different baits that I want to try without having to re-rig them fully and give the bait a little bit better action. This is the Shimano Tranx 300. Huge spool, can handle tossing a big bait. Now I do throw these sometimes with Corrados. I've showed that in the past, and they hold up. They really do. Never had actually a problem, but they do feel a little underpowered only when you start throwing around a Tranx. Throwing these bigger baits that weigh a few ounces at a crack. And my rod of choice is an 8-foot G Loomis IMX Pro 965C SWBR, which stands for swim bait rod. Big long butt on this thing. I can tuck it into my armpit like this and work this bait slow, work it through good areas, kind of make long, soft little hooks with it, trying to drop that bait nice and soft. Awesome setup to use. Again, I do use a lot of NRX Plus, at times GLX, and definitely IMX Pro. It just kind of depends on what it is that I'm looking for. All these different lines in the G Loomis family have specific needs, and this is definitely one of them. All right, we're getting to our final 3. This is a sweet little setup right here that I'm rocking. G Loomis NRX Plus, again, a bladed jig rod, 883, 7.4 medium heavy action rod, throwing a 3/8 ounce Outkast tackle heavy cover swim jig, and I'm throwing it on braid to fluorocarbon. So the swim jig, 3/8 ounce, the little bit bluegilly color here, coming into little pockets like what I'm in right now. The sun's out, it's mid-afternoon. The water temp is slowly rising through the day. Every now and then I look around, I can see some fish just kind of skittish moving around. Swim jig time. The grass just starts to grow. Swim jig time. You can throw this thing, is so versatile. This time of year, really any shallow fishing here on out, but at the same time, a swim jig just is subtle and it gets big bites. I'm using a BioSpawn Craw right here. This has got a great action to it for swimming this thing up in like the reeds, up in any of that alligator grass, any of that kind of stuff that's bank grass that's up there, tules, that I want to throw this jig and kind of work it through real slow. But the bigger action on this thing actually slows my bait down and kind of hovers it more in the water and gets those fish to come out. It's not just a swim jig, it's not just a pitching jig. I'm kind of combining them both, making a pitch into an area, hoping to get a bite. I don't there, I lift it up and I start kind of working it through and trying to keep it in that strike zone as long as I can. Really impressed with this bladed jig rod when I'm using braid as well. So this is 40-pound Power Pro SSV2 braided line, 40-pound test to a 17-pound Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon leader. I'm using a Shimano Metanium HG. Again, I'm using the rod in the reel to impart the action. I don't want to reel it too quick and get it away from those fish. I like to lower a little bit lower gear ratio of that, but this setup with braid, deadly. Absolutely deadly. I'm going to have these rods all over my deck when I'm throwing this stuff, as well as the bigger MBR stuff too, really, which I don't have a lot of that. I'm expecting a little bit more of that come April, May, once we get a little bit more offshore and stuff, and I'll be diving into some of that. But again, this all-around setup, this Outkast tackle, heavy cover, it's got a little bit bigger hook, perfect weed guard. Outkast tackle got on the map. I know we've been pumping out good stuff from the Golden Eye to Feider's jigs to the perfect net head, but these swim jigs is what put Outkast on the map years ago. Some of the best in the business. Cranking. All right, got to be cranking this time of year. Right here, I'm showing off the brand new Shimano Macbeth flat. This is the 57F flat in that sexy little red color. It's that time of year. Like I said, we're approaching there, that mid-50s, that early pre-spawn. Those fish start to really pull up shallow. They're eating a lot of crawdads. They start hating the color red. Classic pre-spawn, literally all over the country. Red, for whatever reason. Some of the only times I ever actually throw it too much too. My rod of choice throwing this is the G Loomis IMX Pro 847 CBR crankbait series rod. It's a 7-power crankbait rod. It's a little heavy. I like throwing square bills on this, like the new Macbeth. That's what I was throwing. I put this on because there's a little bit more subtle action. Got me a few bites right away, but it's a little heavy. I think I'd rather be throwing it on the 845. But this Macbeth flat has actually got jet boost in it. So it's a flat side crankbait that has jet boost that casts further than any of the other ones I've ever seen. Circuit board lip, awesome little bait. They literally just launched it, but my setup is flawless for this. I'm using a Shimano Metanium DC, 7-speed HG DC, straight 12-pound Seaguar Invizx fluorocarbon line. If I wasn't throwing this one right here, I could be throwing a Fritz side, I could be throwing the new Shimano Macbeth, the Jackal MC60, Rapala DT6, all type stuff that you'll be throwing this time of year, pre-spawn. Crankbaits get big bites this time of year. It can be some of the best days, honestly, and this setup is awesome. Why the DC? The DC and all the Shimano is awesome technology. It really is. From beginners to avid pros like myself, at the same time, a lot of times I might be throwing the lightest little crankbait, a shad wrap, something like that, and the DC will actually allow me to do that and allow me to do it with ease, throwing it up underneath stuff and really light little 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce baits and still put them in precision type places. So that's why I like the DC. It's the high end option. I think I get more value out of it there because again, it has that MGL spool. It has everything at their top of the line Metanium DC has to offer and just silky smooth when it comes to putting light things in tight places. So awesome setup. Again, them IMX Pro cranking rods, I don't think you can find a better overall set of cranking sticks out there. I throw the 906 a lot offshore if I'm throwing like 6XD type stuff, DT16, and then of course the 845 and 847, the 7-foot action. Last but not least, I told you I didn't really want to put a spinning rod on this one because I don't throw them much this time of year. Honestly, I'm looking for big pre-spawn bites. I don't want to have to do this, but at the same time, it is shaky head season. And I do have a shaky head. This is a little hand pour one. We're working on a new one from Outkast. I just don't happen to have them yet. It's going to be very similar to this one and how this one sits and sets up. My worm of choice is Zoom Trick Worm, and I don't know if there's a more getting bit shaky head worm out there, so that's why I'm using it. Green pumpkin color. It might get a little bit razzle-dazzle and put a little chartreuse on the tail if I start seeing those bluegills a lot. But again, it is shaky head season. You know, you can come across beds you don't even know are there, males that are starting to pull up, things are starting to get on gravel spots to move into the bays and stuff to spawn, and a shaky head just cleans them up. It's that time of year. But I'm still power fishing it. You know, I'm using a Shimano Accents 4000 like I always do. I like that 4000 size. Too many benefits to not. Again, if you watch it, it picks up line quicker, less line twist, beefier drag, longer cast because of a wider spool. There's just no real advantage to using a 2500 besides maybe they're lighter, but we are talking about Shimano here, and we're talking about a Shimano Accents, a very, very high-end Shimano Rio. It's lighter than most people's 2500 period, so it's plenty. It balances out this rod. And let's talk about the rod. I've talked about it a lot. Loomis NRX Plus 872S jig worm rod, my hands down favorite all-around spinning rod. If you're going to spend money on one high-end spinning rod, make it this one. I could do 95% of all my spinning rod applications I can do with this setup and would be happy to do with this setup. It's a 7.3 extra fast, medium fast tip, extra fast tip, but a lot of backbone to drive those hooks home and manhandle those fish, get them into the boat. I'm not wasting my time just because I'm using spinning tackle trying to wear out a 7-pounder. That's just not what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to, I still want to have the nuts and bolts to be able to put the coals to that fish and get that fish in the boat, and I just need a drag and a rod that's going to back me up, and I have that out of this. If you're going to spend high-end money on one setup, make it your spinning rod, and the 872 would be an awesome, awesome suggestion to do that. All-around great rod. So that's my setup. Oh, I'm using 10-pound Power Pro SSV2 chartreuse line so I can see it. I'm utilizing an FG knot to straight 10-pound Seaguar and Invizx fluorocarbon. If I start throwing this in wood a lot, brush piles, I'll bump it up to 12, but since I'm doing a lot of little open water, little hard spots, gravel bar stuff, I'm perfectly fine with 10. But that is my what's on my deck late February, early March in the South. We'll call it pre-spawn, super pre-spawn. This would be the equivalent of ice just coming out up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. This is a month away in places like Kentucky and Ohio, and yet it's the pre-spawn here for the South. And when you're in Tennessee and all the Tennessee River stuff, Texas, all that, we're looking at a lot of these same type of deals. So again, subscribe to my channel, Josh Douglas Fishing. We're going to keep these coming at you. This one was pretty awesome. Loving these new setups. I got some more stuff in the works. Keep tuning in. Sometimes I'm going to try different things I don't always love. I'll switch it up. But right now, new fresh boat, I had to have a bunch of new setups. Brought them to you guys. Thanks for checking me out. Tune in again. Tight lines.